After a week off, I want to begin by thanking Generalissimo and Kurt Schlichter and Mark Davis and Ed Morrissey. They did a fabulous job filling in for me last week when I was just taking my every 4-year vacation after the presidential once the dust has settled. And usually that week is a kind of a quiet week, 3 weeks after an election. That was not the case because Donald Trump is moving at the speed of light. And the president-elect has named his entire cabinet. And I'll run down that for you. I just want to say first, thanks to everyone who filled in for me. They did a fabulous job. Got lots of comments throughout the week, how much you enjoyed it. And I want to say thank you for your continued prayers and best wishes to Dennis Prager. We've actually posted a banner at hughhewitt.com that you can add your best wishes to Dennis as he continues his recovery. And we'll keep you posted as we get developments here. But we do appreciate, and Dennis certainly, and Sue certainly appreciate your prayers. And I stay in touch with Alan about Dennis. I'm going to fill in for Dennis for the first half of his Caribbean cruise that he takes after Thanksgiving. So I will not be here Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday of next week. Then Mike Gallagher is going to spell me on the boat, and I'm going to come back for Thursday and Friday of next week. That's all mechanics. I am glad to be back. Let me run down for you what Donald Trump did in 1 week. Attorney General Pam Bondi. This is fabulous, by the way. She is terrific. Pam Bondi, I've only interviewed her in person once. She's been on the program a few times. Is smart, smart, smart. And she knows how to run a massive DOJ because Florida's is pretty big. She has already announced, or it has already been announced, that her deputy attorney general will be Todd Blanche. The DAG, as it is called, is in charge of all criminal matters in the Department of Justice. And Todd Blanche is a veteran of the United States Office of Justice up in New York, the Southern District of New York. He ran the criminal division within the Southern District of New York. He knows what he's doing. Andy McCarthy vouches for him. He did a great job and will eventually be exonerated in the New York case. The sham case, he laid enough traps for Alvin Bragg that even if Juan Merchan, the pretend kangaroo court judge, doesn't toss it out, it'll be tossed out on appeal. It's such a joke. At the same time, John Sauer has been named Solicitor General. This is a big deal because the Solicitor General is called the 10th Justice. I hope he goes in. I just finished reading this book, The Mies Revolution, which I have reviewed for the Washington Free Beacon this weekend. I'll talk to Vic Matus at the bottom of the hour. Justice is vast. It's 115,000 people, and you get 50 political appointees, but one of them is the SG, the Solicitor General, and John Sauer is a great pick. Now, I want him to move all of the career Deputy Solicitor Generals out, one at a time. Don't do it in a Saturday Night Massacre fashion. Just every month, one of the career go out and a new person comes in so that, as happened in the Mies Revolution, you do not have 20 deputy solicitor generals fighting with the administration's attempt to change the law back to its originalist intent. We are waiting on the Office of Legal Counsel. We're waiting on the National Security Division, the Natural Resources Division, the Office of Civil Rights, Division of Civil Rights. There's a lot to be done at Justice. But John Sauer, he's a Duke undergrad, Notre Dame, Oxford. Then he went to Harvard Law School. He was a Chuck Cooper associate. He clerked for Mike Luttig and then Justice Scalia. He's fabulous. So we're doing well at Justice. HHS Secretary Robert Kennedy, disruptor. He was part of the key coalition for Donald Trump. I am 100% for his being nominated and confirmed. I believe he will be. If anything goes amiss, you fire him. But the HHS is a giant blob of nothing getting done well or on time. That is a great deal, as is Dr. Oz over at Medicare and Medicaid. It helps to be eloquent and competent. And Dr. Oz is both. He was, by the way, a fabulous surgeon, as the commentary fellows made the point last week. He knows medicine. He knows this stuff cold. And Dr. Oz will be able to communicate in an eloquent fashion about the competent things he is doing to make Medicare and Medicaid work. Over at OMB, Russ Vought is back. And Russ with John Campbell's, I believe, chief of staff, but he is a John Campbell clone. He knows the budget. I hope he is ready to push GDP on defense up to 3.5%, then 4%. I hope that Russ Vought and the new National Security Advisor, Michael Waltz, gets together and they go to join two people designated by the House of Representatives Speaker, Mike Johnson, two people designated by the new incoming Majority Leader John Thune, and that those 6 people roll out on the budget and reconciliation. There is no reason that the budget ought not to be done by the end of February. It could be done by the end of January. And you need a budget resolution, including the projected deficit, in order to, without the filibuster, you need trailing bills. But the budget reconciliation process allows the Congress to pass a budget. The budget can say we're going to have a $3 trillion deficit this year, and we're going to make the Trump tax cuts permanent. We're going to revise and extend them. They're going to take the tax off of tips. They're going to increase the SALT deduction. They're going to do a few other things. Get that done. I'll write a long column about this for Fox News tomorrow. But the budget and reconciliation process has got to move as fast as Trump has with his cabinet. UN Ambassador, we already know, Elise Stefanik. Border Czar Tom Homan. Great. Pete Hegseth will have some trouble in confirmation, but if you listen to Megyn Kelly's broadcast, where she eviscerated the alleged report about, well, it's not an alleged report, it's actually a police report with allegations that do not appear very credible to Megyn Kelly or to me. But it will be an ugly hearing, but I think he'll get through it. Doug Collins is going to be great for Veterans Affairs. Doug Burgum is a fabulous pick for Interior. I cannot tell you how happy I am about this. If he just shutters the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which put out a press release over the weekend that they're protecting giraffes now. It is the worthless, most useless part of the Department of the Interior, but we'll wait and see what Doug Burgum does. He's also chairman of the National Energy Council. Tomorrow I will write that in that position and in the reconciliation budget process, they can authorize 100, 200, 500 small modular reactors to power up America and the growth that we need. Chris Wright will be on the National Energy Council with him as the Department of Energy person. Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy was on this show back when he was in Congress. He's terrific. He's fabulous. We're looking at Howard Lutnick. I do not know. He's going to run Commerce. Commerce is kind of the giant octopus of everything else, but I'm sure he'll do a fine job if he could run. Fitzgerald Cantor, he can run Commerce. Linda McMahon is going to be great at education. She is, again, eloquent and competent and in favor of school choice. Terrific. Scott Bessent, I do not know. The markets are reacting well this morning. More on that. Lori Chavez de Reamer is from the West Coast, defeated in her reelection bid. Diversity at the Secretary of Labor, kind of a liberal Republican, fine by me. William McGinley is going to be White House counsel. Secretary, U.S. Ambassador to NATO is Matt Whitaker, who was the acting Attorney General in the old days. Kristi Noem's going to Homeland Security. That's great. Scott Turner, NFL cornerback, going to be over at HUD. I'm going to look forward to that. John Ratcliffe going over to the agency. Terrific. Tulsi Gabbard, DNI. People are losing their minds over Tulsi. It's a different perspective around the table. I think it's crazy to accuse her of being a Russian asset. That's really slanderous. I do not believe that is the case. She will answer questions about why did you sit down with Assad. I think the Senate will be happy with that. Lee Zeldin going to EPA. Hooray, 5 stars. We've got Marty McCary going over to the FDA commissioner. The doctor has been on a lot. We need an unconventional thinking at FDA. Brooke Rollins going to agriculture, senior advisor to Trump for a long, long time. CDC, David Weldon, I really do not know, but I trust Trump on this. Brendan Carr is fabulous. He's going to the FCC. Free speech warrior. Dan Scavino, great good humor, great goodwill, Deputy Chief of Staff. Stephen Miller is there to enforce the president's desire to make the border wall real, begin the deportation, especially of the 1.2 million with deportation orders. I do not know James Blair, but I'm sure if you're going to be the head of Ledge and political affairs and public affairs at the White House, you've got to have Trump's confidence. Taylor Bedowich has been around for a long time. She's going to be at the Deputy Chief of Staff for Comms. Stephen Chung is going to be Director of Comms, and that's great. He did a fine job on the campaign. Sergio Gore is great, going to be over at the Presidential Personnel Office. I am just generally about as happy as can be with these picks. Now we need, and Carolyn Levitt's going to be the press secretary. What a change that's going to be from KJP. What we need is for the Congress to move as fast as the president is moving. By that, I mean they've got to get the budget together. They've got to agree on a top line. They've got to say we're going to run this amount of deficit in the first year to extend the Trump tax cuts and make them permanent, revise them, get the defense spending up. You can do things like conditioning all federal spending for the states on those states having a robust school choice program, at least the equal of Arizona or Florida's or West Virginia's or Ohio's. There's a lot that can be done in budget and reconciliation, and I hope they do get it done. Been an exciting week. All five-star choices. Trump is moving at the speed of light. We need the Congress to do the same thing in concert with the incoming Trump administration. Get Vought and Waltz together with 2 from the House and 2 from the Senate and get that done so they can roll it out by the end of February. I do want to begin by saying it's November 25th, 30 days to Christmas. This is when I launch every year. This week I launch the Prison Fellowship Angel Tree program for the children of prisoners. $30 takes care of one child whose mom and or dad is in prison and cannot be home with them. And I'm asking you, Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I support this every year. We'll get together later today and figure out, we'll do at least $1,000, figure out what we've got in the budget. But $30 helps one child. $150, 5 kids. Do the math, Steelers fans. $300, 10 kids. $3,000, 100 kids. So if you can give 30 or 3,000 or anything in between, the banner is over at hughhewitt.com. Prison Fellowship makes Christmas happen for these children. They get a note from mom and or dad who's behind bars. They get a present that the child has picked out and made a wish to Santa. They get a note from mom or dad with that present from prison, and they get a Bible and a connection to Angel Tree so that they have adults in their life who care for them beyond their mother or father who's still with them or their caretaker or their social worker. Angel Tree is probably the easiest ask I make. And I know people are getting ready to do Black Friday shopping already. I already got my Christmas present. Look at this. Look at this beauty. How about that, baby? If you're watching on the Salem News Channel, that is a Seabags Cleveland Browns sea bag. Now, why do I need a Cleveland Browns sea bag? So that when I go to the beach, you can absolutely be sure. I'm not going to go to the beach until February, but you can be absolutely sure my Browns beach bag is going with me. That's not what these kids want. These kids want wiffle balls and bats. They want a glove to toss around with their friends. They want a football. Little girls might want whatever little girls want. I don't know. I don't do the Christmas present shopping, and I was never very good at it when I did do it. But I know that you can be a part of a Christmas that you will not see until you're in heaven, and then you will be very happy that you did indeed help the least of these. That's the gospel admonition. $30. You can donate for one child over at HughHewitt.com. You cannot miss the banner. Not even you Steelers fans can miss the banner. It's at the top. I can't make fun of Steeler fans for the whole year. I'm not going to, even though the Browns beat you in the snow when I was away. Not going to bring that up. Nick Chubb rumbling for 2 touchdowns. Not going to bring that up. Not going to bring it up because you guys elected Dave McCormick and gave Donald Trump the White House. So I'm going to be nice to the Yinzers. Promise you, I'm going to be nice to the Yinzers. Let me check the markets. Brought to you by our friend Nick Grovich at American Federal. You want to give a Christmas present to your grandchild that they can't spend, can't lose, can't break? Give them a piece of gold. Give them an ounce of gold. And tell mom and dad to put it away somewhere where they cannot lose it or forget it. Because gold keeps its value for the past 100 years. Gold more than kept pace with inflation. It's trading at $2,674 an ounce. It's a big Christmas present. Maybe you can only afford, you got 4 grandkids, you buy 4 quarter ounces and you give it to them, they're little tiny pieces of gold, but they'll think it's fabulous. They'll think you're a leprechaun, Grandma and Grandpa. Do that. Call 1-800-221-7694 to talk to Nick and his team. Or maybe you want to buy yourself something for Christmas and you say to your wife or your husband, I don't want it. Let's get some gold. 1-800-221-7694. And as I said, gold this morning at $2,674 an ounce. Now, on Friday, the markets had a great day because there was rumors that Scott Bessent was going to be the Secretary of Treasury. He has been announced as Secretary of Treasury. Everybody loves the Trump team, and they know he's going to extend the tax cut. So the market on Friday, the Dow was up 426 points. That's almost 1%. The S&P up 20, the NASDAQ up 31. Looks like a good day on the markets today. Everybody's happy with Trump. But if you want to make sure that inflation is not your enemy, have some gold. Get that gold from our friend Nick Grovich at AmericanFederal.com, AmFed, Bullion and Coin at AmericanFederal.com. Vic Matus is, of course, co-host of Getting Hammered, your morning show for any time of the day, twice a week. Vic is also the weekend editor of the Washington Free Beacon. And I must declare, a fine editor. I did a dangerous thing. Vic's my friend, but he asked me to write something and I submitted it. And we got through that. You know, most of my former editors are wounded, Vic. They're out there lying on the ground wounded.
Yeah, yes, that's right, Hugh. I think the aim for every editor is to try to make as many changes as possible without the writer knowing you made any changes. And if you could do that, then you have succeeded. But no, I'm more of the Irving Kristol school of editing, which is take out, don't put in. And I really do
Yeah.
believe that. I mean, you can tighten things up, but I am not going to insert my voice into yours because you and I have very different voices.
I am here to tell everyone who wants to write something, ask Vic to be your editor because I normally go back and forth 4 or 5 rounds with every piece I've ever written, and editors all over the country hate me, but not Vic. So, Vic, I am, however, deeply alarmed and troubled by the
Yeah.
behavior of your co host, who has already put Christmas bedding on her children's beds. This is not acceptable.
Well, Hugh, the problem is there's no turkey bedding that she can put on the bed. I mean, she celebrates many holidays, but they don't have enough, linens and sheets that celebrate Thanksgiving, which is coming up. So she just jumps right to the next one. She's traveling, as you know, she goes everywhere, all across the country to spread the good word and getting hammered. And she was just in, I think, Dallas, and she was in LA to do Real Time with Bill Maher. And so she wants to get ahead of the game. She's not doing the outside stuff now. It's not like she's showing off to the neighbors that the lights are up yet, but inside she gets them into that mentality
Now,
that
Vic,
Christmas
here's
is
the
coming.
crucial question for you. Last night, we had a family dinner with as much family as we had around. And at one of my son's homes, there is a Christmas tree already out and decorated. Now, this is a line in the sand for me. I did not raise him this way. I did not raise him this way. I know he loves Christmas. Lots of people love Christmas, but we don't start Christmas music until after Thanksgiving, and the tree does not go up until after Thanksgiving. In fact, I don't think we're putting one up at all this year. How about in the Mattis household? Is there a tree anywhere in sight?
Okay, no, there is not a tree, but perhaps by December 20 we will have one. My wife likes a live tree. I grew up with a plastic one that sort of mortified her. So I had to take her lead, go to the place, find the right cut, and do these different things to
Oh,
make it
no.
fit.
One of
And I'm telling
those?
you, it's wonderful though. Yeah, no,
Oh, one of
it's
those.
wonderful. It doesn't shed. Yes. We will have one probably by the first week of December, I'm guessing.
I wanted to meet Kate, but now that I know she's one of those, I'm not sure because I'm afraid it's catching. I am proud that in my 6+ decades, I have never ventured into an actual lot of growing trees with a saw or an axe or whatever. What do you use, by the way?
Yeah, well, it's the Boy Scouts usually do this, and they do a great job, and they use a saw just to trim the stump a little bit. But I tell you, I had my misgivings as well because I've always heard about shedding trees, the needles and everything, but in fact, it holds up well. You got to water it every day, or she does to be more accurate, and the room smells great, and
All
that
right,
puts
now,
you
Vic,
really in the yeah.
you've got two teenagers. My mother had 3 boys, and she learned never to let the boys do the tinsel because we're interested for about 15 seconds, and then you clump it.
Mhm.
You just like throw it and on. Do you do tinsel on your tree, or are you a lights only guy?
No, okay. So this actually is a very easy question for me, Hugh, which is A, we do not do tinsel, and B, pretty much my wife does all the decorating.
This is
And
good.
if, you know,
This is
yes,
good. It's
no,
in
I mean it's all
Genesis. It's in the Bible.
it's in the yeah, that's right. I mean, and perhaps the less attractive decorations and ornaments go on the backside of the tree. I mean, there's a reason for everything. And I hang one ornament up, which is a pickle. It's not a real pickle, by the way, but I guess
Oh, thank
apparently it is a
goodness.
German tradition. You have to have a pickle in the tree. Yeah,
Is Kate German?
she is part German, part Irish.
Well, I
It's
am
really the
German
best of
Irish,
both
and I have
worlds.
never heard of the pickle. I think you've been
Yeah.
sold a bill of goods. I've never heard of the pickle.
Yeah, look up the pickle. Look up the pickle. It's like good luck, I think, or something to that effect.
No, but there are many German traditions, like Silent Night, I believe, is a German Christmas carol, and
It is.
snow and things like that. But I've never heard of the pickle. Vic, what other? We're going into the season. I don't know who
Yeah.
cooks for Thanksgiving. We have 2 grandmothers in town, so the cooking is covered. They'll just be cooking up all week. How about at the Mattis household? Who does all the cooking?
Well, It's a team effort, but we go down the street to, Kate's cousins. They do a deep fried turkey. One of my chief and I it's a fantastic turkey because it takes, not a lot of time to cook it. You have to be very careful, do it outside. You don't wanna
Oh,
cause a
yeah.
fire, but it's gonna be, crispy on the outside, juicy on the inside. My job, for Thanksgiving here is I make a giant pitcher of Manhattans. So it's something to the effect of 40 ounces of bourbon, 20 ounces of vermouth, and 40 drops of whatever bitters you like, chocolate, walnut, or regular Angostura.
Wouldn't walnut
And
be
that's my
appropriate for this
responsibility.
season?
It
Isn't
would be. No,
walnut the appropriate?
absolutely. It's wonderful,
Now,
and, you have to have
Vic,
real cherries.
the wonderful Mrs. Hewitt, my departed mother who's in heaven, and she'll forgive me for telling you this, was a nurse, not a cook. And she was a fabulous nurse and a horrible cook. In fact, I called home one day after I had moved out and was married, and she told me the oven was broken. I asked her, how would she know? That's how bad of a cook she was. So I grew up on dry, cold turkey. That was it. That was the main meal every year, dry, cold turkey. In Jersey, do the Jersey moms know how to do turkey?
Yes, my late mother, likewise, was also a nurse. But she did a fine turkey, but it wasn't, from a farm. It was, butterball. It's a butterball turkey. The turkey itself was fine. Her claim to fame was making actually a French stuffing. Now, of course, she's not French; she's Filipino. But we got the recipe from a neighbor who happened to be French, and it is a fantastic stuffing. And it's with ground pork and celery and chestnuts. The key is chestnuts, and you cook it in the bird, and it's nice and crusty on the outside and tender and juicy on the inside. And I'm going to have to do that eventually one of these years.
Now, this
So
brings us
did
to
a great
West
job.
Wing, Vic.
Oh, yes.
I have never until yesterday watched 1 minute of West Wing. And the reason is I figured it was, and everyone has told me it is, in fact, a liberal or leftist idea of how the White House runs with no connection to reality whatsoever. And I know the White House, I've worked in the White House, and so I didn't want to watch it. But yesterday they had Martin Sheen doing his Butterball Hotline bit. And I thought it was kind of amusing. Are you aware of that
Yeah.
bit? And
Yes, I'm
so,
aware of it 'cause I saw it on your clip, and he's
oh,
very
okay.
good at that.
Well, was that
Yeah.
the only bit of the West Wing that you've seen?
No, I've seen other episodes of The West Wing. I'm not as faithful a watcher as perhaps the staffers at the Biden-Harris White House. Apparently, that's required viewing over there. It gets a bit obviously sanctimonious and pretentious, particularly how they feel about it and what they think about their role. It sort of beats you down because obviously he is a Democrat. It's sort of like the TV series version of the American president. So it is a bit much. There are good moments. There are very interesting episodes. It's a stellar cast. There's no question about that, but it's not necessarily my cup of tea. John Goodman, however, played the Republican Speaker of the House, and he's good. A bit of a parody, but still a good role.
I'm not starting down, but I did like the Butterball Turkey, which brings me to my closing question. Joe Biden is still president. People have forgotten that. And we usually have a little ceremony at the White House where two turkeys are pardoned. I'm a little bit worried about the turkeys this year. Are you worried about the turkeys this year, given the president's infirmities?
Yes, on the one hand, I am. On the other hand, they're very much into pardoning. It's in the spirit of pardoning, and that might not be the only turkey or turkeys being pardoned, Hugh, before the end of his term. Uh,
Oh,
so
you're
uh, I'm
right.
not, I'm not so worried about that.
You could sneak Hunter right in between whatever they call the two turkeys.
Yes,
You're absolutely right.
that's right.
Vic, normally Getting Hammered drops on Thursday. I assume you've pre-taped it.
Yes, no, we taped the show last week, and it is coming out on Wednesday, and it is a special blind taste test Thanksgiving episode. You're gonna love it.
A blind, is it a turkey taste test or is it a drink taste test?
It is actually a gravy and stuffing taste test.
Oh, you're one of those. See, I'm not a big stuffing guy at all. In fact,
No,
Thanksgiving
yeah.
food doesn't do it for me. But how many different kinds of stuffing are there? There's one.
Yeah, I know. four different kinds of, and so this is for, our listeners. If in case you don't have time to make your own stuffing, we are talking about instant stuffings. So we do four instant stuffings and four different gravies, and we rank them. Props to our producer Jennifer for putting that all together.
Well, I will be looking forward to the Getting Hammered special edition on Wednesday, even though I am a stuffing skeptic. I'm stuffing skeptical here at the Hugh Hewitt Show. So, Vic Matus, good to see you. Follow him on Twitter at Victorino Matus. Go get Getting Hammered. Subscribe and like. Give them your comments and be prepared to be entertained because it is the joint podcast for the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I, the joint podcast, the one that we like to do together because we always laugh. Selena Zito joins me. It's the Yinzer Report. Good morning, Selena. How are you?
Good morning, sunshine. How are you? I'm chilly.
I
How are
am great.
you?
I am great. Let me ask you, Dave McCormick, Senator-elect Dave McCormick, is now officially the senator-elect because Bob Casey conceded. It took him a long time. We had a lot of bumps along the way. I don't think Governor Shapiro, your friend and mine, covered himself in glory here. But my key question is Pennsylvania turning red the way Ohio did, the way Missouri did, the way Iowa did?
Yeah, Pennsylvania has people don't notice it because it was incremental, but since 1996, every 4 years it becomes 0.4% more red. Eventually, it's red. And I think that what throws people off is because of Shapiro and Fetterman winning. Except Shapiro and Fetterman winning in 2022, they ran as moderate Democrats who kept the New Deal Democrat coalition, which is now part of the Republican conservative populist coalition. They were able to hold them into the party because they ran. Shapiro ran as a pragmatic, and Fetterman ran as a populist. But the state is definitely much more red than it has ever been in and 2020, as I wrote the other day. 2020 was the fluke. A lot of people said that 2016 was a fluke when Trump won, and no, the fluke was Biden in 2020. I meant 2016
Yeah,
when
and
Trump
I
won.
agree with that because I follow on a macro level. First
Right.
Missouri went, then Iowa, then
Yeah.
Ohio. And that March red is, I think, going to
Yeah.
continue for Wisconsin's been the most closely contested over 3 cycles, but it's going red. Michigan, I'm not so sure about, but I think PA is going to be solidly red. Tell me a little bit about consequences for the Bucks County lawbreaker lady who went on TV and told everyone she was going to count illegal votes. Are there any consequences for breaking the law that way?
Oh, absolutely. Bucks County has always been a swing county, but there's parts of it that are sort of suburban Philly, and have the more wealthy upper middle class enclaves. But most of it is working class, very similar to Washington County or Westmoreland County in the western part of the state. And it moved in voter registration from dominant Democrat to now Republican. And I think, and I'm glad you brought that up because I think there are consequences for what Bob Casey did that impacts a lot of other Democrats. And I would put that on the Bucks County commissioners, but I would also put that on Josh Shapiro. There are a lot of Trump Shapiro voters out there. Shapiro does not win governor in 2022 without Trump supporters. And they are very unhappy that he did not step up and if you remember, in 2000, what future Governor Ed Rendell did as chair of the DNC with Al Gore on December 13th. And he says, hey, you got to get out of here. And he did it on national television. And I think a lot of Pennsylvania voters were waiting for Shapiro to say, "Hey, let's cut this out. We're spending taxpayer money on this, and he's gaining no votes."
Let me ask you about the Trump cabinet vis-a-vis the Pennsylvania voters. He delivered a cabinet as diverse as his coalition when you put in
Yep.
Robert Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard. Is that a good thing politically in Pennsylvania? I'm just asking Pennsylvania politics right
Yes.
now because it is the
Yes.
key. Is that a good thing?
Yeah, absolutely. This is exactly what they expected. They did not expect to see a march of um, ideologues. They expected to see a cabinet as diverse as they are. A lot of people took a chance that were not traditional Republicans, and have come from very diverse places. They expected a cabinet to reflect the coalition.
All right, last question, Selena. Butler and Erie. How did they do in the election? Did Erie go for Trump? Because it's always been as Erie goes, so goes the country.
Yeah, I called it. Erie went for Trump. Yeah, absolutely. And I
As
hope
much as
people take a look.
Trumbull County went 57% for Trump, which is so
Yeah,
astonishing
that's
to me having grown up there.
yeah, that whole line right there, that whole spine in Ohio and Pennsylvania. I would like to do a shameless push here and have people take a look at my year-long reporting on McCormick and how he won, because it's not how people maybe think what happened. And I thought the way that McCormick ran his race, I was pretty confident he was going to win all along. And it had a lot of that was they understood that Bob Casey did not have the equity that people about 30,000 feet assumed that he did have.
I think you did cover Dave McCormick early and often, and Dina Powell, and they ran the perfect Senate campaign, the equal of any other Senate campaign. It puts me in mind of John Thune's 2000
Yes,
second race. I
yes.
think it's 2004. He beats Tom Daschle. It's that good of a campaign. He went everywhere, and he went everywhere with people like Selena Zito following him. Follow Selena on Twitter at Zito Selena. Her website is selenazito.com. Get an email, find out everything she writes every week. Thank you, Selena. And I'm not going to bring up that the Browns beat the Steelers in the cold and snow of Cleveland. Not going to do it. Wouldn't be prudent. Cesar Grajales from the Americans for Prosperity Spanish side. AFP did so much for Donald Trump in this election that Cesar, welcome. We've got a problem getting him up. It is an amazing thing that they did. It's called the Libra Initiative. Caesar's on one of the Salem stations, I believe, in Miami. I'm not sure, but he's there. He is. Hey, Caesar. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Very good. Happy to be here.
Caesar, would you tell people a little bit about the Libra Initiative and what the Americans for Prosperity was doing with its Spanish language outreach this cycle?
Yes, well, the Libre Initiative is part of the group, big group, Stand Together community. The Libre Initiative was created in 2011 with the goal of reach out the Latino community in the country with center-right ideas and policies. And we have been in the community in many different participating with many different angles and events, but also media. And now or in my case, I've been in part of the sailing family with my radio show, El Panorama Político, here in South Florida and Miami. But also, the president, Daniel Garza, has been in many different media outlets in Spanish. In my case, also, besides the radio show, I also go to the traditional media outlets of TV, I know the regular Univision Telemundo, CNN Espanol, and all of those media outlets to really reach out the community and tell why it's important to support center right policies to really for the benefit of the community. And at the end of the day, see, having the Latino community supporting the right policies is always good, not just for Latinos, but the whole Americans.
Now, Caesar, I'm so glad you're a Salem colleague. I have heard for years that we are active in expanding our footprint within the Spanish language radio world, but I didn't know how effective it was until people told me about you and about the AFP partnership. Why are Hispanic men the story of election 2024? I mean, they are the story of election 2024. Why did that happen?
I would say this, in my experience, and also as an immigrant, I came to the United States 25 years ago. I always say there are two types of Latinos in the country. The Latinos who were born here have the opportunity of being born in the United States, maybe first generation, second generation. Or in my case, like me, that I came here and assimilated and again with my family 25 years ago. But what we are looking for is always for the right policies. People, if people feel that they are not represented with the right policies, like for instance, this election cycle, people were feeling for the past almost 4 years that the pain in their pockets when they go to the supermarket, when they try to pay for gas, when they try to pay for school supplies for their kids. Obviously, they were feeling that everything that the Washington were saying, that the economy was fine and everything was fine, that was a big lie, and people see it, and Latinos saw that. So obviously, conservatives came with a better agenda in this election cycle, and regardless of party affiliation, let me tell you why. Because uh, Latinos voted this election cycle for conservative policies, regardless of their party affiliation. I know for a fact that there were Democrats, independents, voting for Republicans this year, conservatives. So the big news this election cycle is that Latinos will support policy, no personalities or parties. They will support policies. And frankly, this year, conservatives really offer a great amount of policies, and we hope that those promises are actually are delivered through the legislation and the new Congress that is going to begin next year. For not just for Latinos. Latinos are also in general Americans. We care about what all Americans care about, which is the economy, and also another sensible topic was immigration, but immigration from the angle of security. People and Latinos specifically, they want more security. When we say security, is that yes, we want an immigration reform, but also we want a more stronger border. People living at the border, Latinos living in these towns next to the border, they really feel and see every day what is happening with this immigration crisis, and they want to feel secure, and that's I guess the reason, or one of the reasons they support a more conservative agenda this election cycle.
Caesar, I got two key questions. Donald Trump gets to use the budget reconciliation process early on to pass a bunch of stuff if the Congress can get a budget passed and trailer bills. One of those will be to build the border wall. But do you want to see attached to that any immigration reform, such as a Dreamer extension that the President 45, 47 Trump wanted in his first year as president? I think he might want it again. Does that matter in the Latino community still?
I think it is a very sensible topic, but I guess this election cycle show that Latinos want to feel, first of all, secure. So anything that really gonna improve the security at the border, most likely is gonna be supported by Latinos. But number two, yes, there are groups that definitely deserve a more stable um, process for them, a more permanent stay in the country, like dreamers. We saw that during the pandemic, over 30,000 of them, of the so-called dreamers, they were working in the healthcare industry. So those are people now that actually are contributing in a positive way to the country. So we need to look for those kind of stories and people and segments of the population, of the Latino population, of undocumented immigrants that are actually contributing to the country, and find a way to help them to stay in the country. But also, again, the border security. We need to find a way to really secure the border. People living in those towns, they need to feel that they secure. And I always say this: people who immigrated to this country, in my case, and this is talking from my experience, when we left behind our country of origin, we left it behind because two reasons. Number one, yes, we're looking for opportunities. We're looking for a more stable, uh, uh, more stability for our families. But also, we left behind our countries of origin because we are looking for security, for safety. And frankly, for the past almost 4 years, we haven't seen that in this country. When we see these stories in the news about Tren de Aragua and all these people, that scares a lot of Latinos, and that scares a lot of Americans, frankly. But people who lived through those unstable moments in Latin America, for instance, coming from Colombia, right in the peak of the violence and the beginning of the 2000s. So obviously, when you see those stories that you see in all these people, sadly, most of the people who try to come to the United States, they really want to contribute in a positive way, but many others are coming and are really bad people. So you see that, and you support policies that really going to strengthen the border. And I hope that happens, but also find a path again to improve the immigration process for people who really wants to contribute to the nation in a positive way, and also helping businesses that are maybe they don't find the right talents in the country for jobs or something. Maybe they need to bring it from another countries. Then facilitate the process for those businesses to
Caesar,
have
I think Donald Trump
employees.
is in the best position to do both. He can do the Nixon to China. He can build the border wall, deliver security. He can also regularize the dreamers. I want to know if media is willing to talk to you as a voice of center right Latinos. Has mainstream media, I want to know about your podcast. Tell people about the podcast. I know about the Salem radio, but what about Telemundo, Univision, Spanish language television? Are they willing to have the Cesar Grajables come and talk to them about what matters in your community?
Lately, I will say that it's been a little bit more easy than 10 years ago. When we started Libre, it was a challenge to be part of those media outlets and frankly going and talk frequently about this, the right policies, the center right policies. We were kind of fighting for spots in Univision and Telemundo. Lately, they have been more open. I have to agree and admit that they call me pretty much every week. And I hope it's because they find out the Latinos really want to hear about these policies. And the election cycle is an example of that, that they are aligned with, well, when you see that over 45, almost 46% of the Latino voted for the conservative center right policies, is because they're really paying attention to that. And you better, as Telemundo and Univision, bring people who are presenting those ideas in that angle, and not just bringing people from the center left or far left that were dominating Univision and
Caesar,
Telemundo, many other
word
realities.
music to my ears, because every every single major media outlet, whether in English or Spanish, have got to figure out what this election said, which is we are tired of left-wing propaganda on television. Get the Cesar Grajales and others from the Latino community to speak on their behalf. Congratulations, Cesar. Great for Americans for Prosperity, great for Salem. Good to have you. I look forward to having you back. Time to remind you, we are doing our Angel Tree Drive. Every year at this time, I remind you, it only takes $30 to make a child's Christmas whose mom and or dad are in jail, prison, behind bars. Angel Tree steps in, a Ministry of Prison Fellowship. The banner is at the top of HughHewitt.com. Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I will caucus later today. We'll make our contribution as we do whenever we kick off this campaign. But this audience has always been extremely generous to these children who otherwise don't get a Christmas. But if you help them out, $30 per child, they get a present from a list they've given to Santa or mom or dad or their caregiver. Could be a football, could be a doll, could be a train. I don't know. Whatever they want. They get a note from mom or dad in jail saying, here's your present from me, son or daughter. And they get a Bible and they get a relationship with Angel Tree. And we love Angel Tree. So that's Christmas present number one. Christmas present number two for your best client. Many of you are professionals who have to always go through the agony of giving a gift that your best clients will love. Some of you do fruit of the month, and that's fine, but that really doesn't, they just, oh, it's fruit of the month again. Or you give them a nutmeg or a fruitcake or something like that. Here's what you give them. Go to besthotgrill.com. My friend Rhett Rasmussen, United States Naval Academy class of 1982, family-owned business. They make the best hibachi in the world. Perfect Christmas present for your best customers. Give them the portable grill to take to every tailgate. They might be a Yinzer. Give them one anyway. They deserve it after delivering Pennsylvania for Trump. They could be a, Ohio State Buckeyes, and we crush the. Does University of Indiana have like a nickname? Not sure. But they got they got crushed by the Buckeyes at the Shoe, and the Shoe's going to crush. It's that week, and we haven't heard that music yet. It's that week. It's the week of the game, but I guess I have to push Adam a little bit harder because it is the week of the game, and Ohio State's just going to crush that team up north. But if you got friends in either state, give them the hibachi. Go to besthotgrill.com. If you want to give yourself a Christmas present, use the Try It Before You Buy It program. Get the Solaire infrared grill delivered to your home. Try it for a few weeks, and you will never send it back. I mean, it's the easiest. I suppose someone's done it once. I don't know what the problem was, but I'm telling you right now, it's the greatest grill in America. You can only get it from besthotgrill.com. You can also get fireballs, fire logs for your fireplace. But remember, if you have a client that you want to love you and that you really want to remember this Christmas, besthotgrill.com. Now, let me tell you, if there's a young person in your life, the Christmas present for them is a trip to the Wild Adventure Young Guns. Give a listen.
Hi, I'm from Chicago, Illinois.
I'm from Oklahoma.
Houston, Texas.
And I'm from San Ynez Valley in Central California.
I'm from Los Angeles, California.
And where are you standing now?
I am at the Wild Adventure Young Guns trip.
Montana.
Rainbow Lake. And what's one of your biggest highlights?
Oh man, I caught an awesome fish. It was one of the best experiences of my life, just the way it hit the line. Everything happened all at once. It was just beautiful and everyone was cheering on. It was fun. It was awesome.
See, the Young Guns go over to Rainbow Lake, which I've never been allowed to fish at because they don't want me to fish that out the way I did the Madison. I've seen it. It's beautiful. But if you have a young man in your life, 21 to 30, go over to thewildadventure.us, twa.us, and sign them up. It's a big gift, but it will change their life. And you'll be very glad when they come home. They will have, you leave your cell phones at the door because there's no reception up there. 12 guys get together. I know young men who've been on it. They say it's fabulous. Wonderful leadership. TWA.US. Change their life with a trip to Montana. TWA.US. Admiral Mark Montgomery, Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, is retired from the United States Navy. He helped helm the Cyber Solarium 1.0. Now it's back at 2.0. He is also Senior Director at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy. Good morning, Admiral. Happy Thanksgiving week to you. We're muted.
Good morning to you too, Hugh. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Admiral, I want to talk to you primarily about Ukraine this morning. I don't know what President-elect Trump has planned. He has not yet named a special envoy. Might be Rick Grinnell, might be Robert O'Brien. Is there a deal to be had? And if so, how do we get to it?
You know, Hugh, there is a deal to be had. And look, and I say this as someone who really thinks we need to support Ukraine to the maximum and put pressure on Putin. So I think the deal to be had, could be pulled right out of the art of the deal. And the idea in the art of the deal is that you deal from a position of strength. So I think if we spend a couple months putting significant pressure on President Putin, pressure that hasn't been put on him by the Biden administration, that President Trump will be in a great position 3 or 4 months from now to call up Vladimir Putin and say, hey, Vladimir, how did you appreciate me giving full weapons expansion to the Ukrainians? How did you appreciate me continuing assistance, maybe as a loan, not a grant? How did you appreciate me putting pressure on the Europeans to carry their load? And then most importantly, how did you appreciate me bringing economic pressure on you through actual sanctions on the shadow fleet, drilling and leasing in the United States so that Russia's economy begins to really suffer. Russia's oil and natural gas based economy begins to really suffer under U.S. pressure. Once all that pressure's on, I think the best deal maker is going to get a good deal from Vladimir Putin, and that's the only way.
Now, I was in conversation yesterday at church with a foreign correspondent who tells me all the sound and fury about the ATACMS being allowed to be used in Russia doesn't really amount to much in the eyes of the Russians because there are only 56 ATACMS in Ukraine, medium-range missile, 150 miles, something like that, not really unleashing Ukraine against Russia. What do you make of the Biden administration's last-minute efforts to unleash the Ukrainian ability to strike at the Russian energy infrastructure?
Well, if I was generous, I would say they're starting that maximum pressure campaign for President Trump. If I was less generous, I would say they're worried about their legacy of being seen as as someone who provided weapon systems, but with such restrictions that we were really just allowing Ukraine to play for a tie. In other words, we weren't giving them the kind of weapons and authorizations necessary to take full measure of those weapon systems. And so ATACMS, it's too late in terms of being able to hit the concentrated Russian areas that were close to the Ukrainian border, logistics, ammunition, airfields, troop concentration areas. The Russians have moved back beyond what they considered the likely range of the ATACMS when released. And so a lot of that opportunity was lost, but I think they're trying to kind of like cement for legacy that they did this. And it's really unfortunate that they waited to after, I think they waited for the election for political reasons. And, in the end, when you do things like that, you imperil your allies and partners.
Admiral, I'm also pro-Ukraine and want independence to remain there and want to be a realist about how to get this done. In your mind, having studied it extensively, what is the realistic scenario that sees an end to what is basically World War I in the 21st century?
Well, it's not going to be easy, and I think I spent, as I mentioned to you previously, I spent a few weeks there training their general officers on kind of joint planning operations, things like that, and they're just finally getting to use the F-16s. In fact, one of the pilots, American pilots, and he said they're using the F-16s as MiG-16 still. I mean, they really haven't fully gotten that together. They haven't figured out how to integrate air and ground operations the way the United States forces were. If they're given enough time here, a few months to get that, they will be able to bring a lot more pressure at the point of the conflict. But I have to tell you, Hugh, the thing that's killing them is artillery. And this is where the North Koreans really have played a big role. I know we all concentrate on their 11,000 troops, but their 11,000 troops aren't the big deal here. It's the 5 million rounds of artillery of all kinds of sizes that they've provided the Russians. That's decades of U.S. production have been provided by North Korea to Russia. As a result, the kind of ingoing, outgoing still sits at 7 or 8 to 1 in terms of artillery rounds between Russia and Ukraine. So to really change things, they're going to need to be able to conduct kind of the offensive operations that move artillery back, that allow their forces a little bit of room for maneuver. So do I think there's an opportunity? Yes. And really the opportunity is to get Russia on their back foot so that someone can come in with a deal for Vladimir Putin that's one that he can choke down, as opposed to one that he imposes on Zelensky.
So, Admiral, how important is it that the Ukrainians hold on to their salient into Russia? Because no one saw that coming, but now I read reports that that's where the North Koreans are going to combine with Russian forces to push Ukraine back into Ukraine. What is your understanding of that salient?
Yeah. So I think if the negotiations very soon, then holding on to the salient has value. But if the negotiations really at the end of the summer, a lot of other things will play out in here to give the Ukrainians some leverage. I think the one thing they need to make sure they do is don't lose their really high quality forces that are in that Kursk area, because they use some of their best forces to create that salient. And they really are not in a position personnel wise to lose a significant amount of forces in Kursk. So at some point, they've got to make an operational decision on that. I mean, right now there's value in it. There may not be value in it 3, 4, 5 months from now.
So, Admiral, it seems pretty clear to me, but I'm a civilian, that we have an alliance of our enemies, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and of course, China. China's buying Russia's oil. North Korea is sending ammunition and men. Iran is sending oil and the drones that it makes. Is this a de facto alliance of evil here? Because it does seem that way to me. I'm not a strategist, not a military guy, but some things are pretty obvious, and this looks pretty obvious to me.
Hugh, you're exactly right. I mean, Ukraine is at war with 4 countries for the exact reason you said. Israel is starting to see North Korean equipment show up with Hezbollah. We're seeing the Houthis, trying to get anti-ship cruise missiles from China and Russia. The Houthis, another Iranian or proxy organization. What we're seeing is our adversaries are fighting together. It may have started out very transactional, but they're developing these relationships economically and security-wise, and that's who we're confronting. And we and our Western allies have to understand that. So when we tell our Western allies that they need to be careful with their trade and their technology transfer with China, they need to listen to us. When the Israelis have certainly backed off any perception that China or Russia can be a neutral player with them. Each of our allies and partners needs to understand we are fighting a cabal of four, authoritarian states who are absolutely willing to share technology, equipment, personnel, and economic support.
Now, Admiral, I want to play for you and then come back and get your assessment. Admiral Paparo went to Brookings recently and gave his details on what the PLA is doing vis-a-vis Taiwan. Let's listen to cut number one.
Over the summer, I saw the most rehearsal and the most joint exercises from the People's Republic of China that I'd ever seen. With the widest geography, the jointest operations for air, missile, maritime power that I'd seen over an entire career of being an observer. And this included, on one particular day, 152 vessels at sea, including 3/4 of the amphibious force, 200 combat amphibious shapes in the water. I'd seen 43 brigades, including breaching obstacles, onward movement to military operations in urban terrain. We saw also 2 demonstrations of military power in response to the Taiwan inauguration on May 20th, and then once again on 10/10, Taiwan National Day, as it's so called.
So, Admiral Montgomery, I'm kind of surprised to hear Admiral Paparo speak that bluntly. Are you?
No, because I know Sam and he's a blunt speaker. I think one of the things he didn't say there, but he would normally say is, he war games these things a lot, and he still thinks the United States has an advantage. I war game these things a lot playing him, and I think we still have military advantages. But let's not shy away from what he was saying there. They are absolutely trying to meet, Chairman Xi's guidance to be able to invade the island by 2027. Now, we're doing things that are making it harder for them to win in that invasion, but don't be mistaken. The Chinese investment over the last 25 years has been brilliant, and they have gone from a military that could do almost nothing during this, last Taiwan Straits crisis when we sailed 2 aircraft carriers in the vicinity of Taiwan, to today where they can push us back beyond the first island chain and muster up the forces to do a cross-strait invasion. I still don't think they can win, but I think that they can put a lot of pressure on us and force us to make very hard decisions that end up with a significant number of U.S. casualties when we push them back.
So, Admiral, how does Ukraine connect to China, connect to Israel? Would you explain it for the Steelers fans who are listening? We're being nice to them because Pennsylvania helped Trump win, but we nevertheless make it Steeler friendly.
Thanks. I thought we were being nice to him over Thursday night, but okay. So we have to be, at this point, whether you supported us going into Ukraine or not on February, supporting Ukraine with, treasure, not blood, in February of 2022, whether you supported that or not, 2 years into it, you can't back out versus an authoritarian. The lesson the authoritarian will lose is the same lesson they learned watching us chaotically withdraw from Afghanistan, was that the United States is not a reliable ally. The United States will cut and run at the wrong time if we're not careful, if pressured. And so the lesson Putin will learn when he deals with Georgia, Moldova, or eventually the Baltic states is I can keep pushing and the United States will eventually back down. What China will learn is we can push on Taiwan and the United States won't step forward. Iran, will try the same with Israel. I think they'll find a bit of a viper in Israel, but and again, North Korea with South Korea. So all of these authoritarian states are studying us closely. Part of deterrence is that there has to be a credible belief you'll use your capability and capacity. And if we're not even willing to support Ukraine with just treasure, no blood, that's going to be a bad signal to give to 4 authoritarian, rapacious leaders.
Admiral, what does Donald Trump need to do in the appointment of a Secretary of the Navy, a DepSec of the Navy, acquisition people at the Navy, and does he have to direct Russ Vought to up the Pentagon's budget, but shift it more to the Navy and away from the Army?
Oh, thanks. You brought up the last point you brought up is the first point, really, which is that it doesn't matter who he appoints if there's insufficient resources. And look, we don't talk about this enough. Under the Obama administration, defense spending as a percentage of gross domestic product, which is an important number because that's the number, that's what it costs to produce things in the United States, fell from 4.5% to 3.1% at the end of the Obama administration. Under the first Trump administration, it grew back to 3.4%. It's now decayed back down to 3.1% and almost 3%. And I believe if we'd had a future President Harris, it would have gone down to 2.9 or 2.7% over time. He has to actually increase it. He has to work with Senator Wicker, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and Representative Rogers, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, to raise our defense spending up. I think a reasonable amount is 0.1% of GDP a year. So that's about 28 trillion GDP. That's about 30 billion a year, each year increase, but every year. You can't take breaks. And that'll get us back up to 3.4, 3.5 at the end of Trump 47. If you don't do that, it doesn't matter who the secretary is. Once you do that, you got to take a good chunk of that money and give it to the Navy. You got to take a smaller chunk of that money and give it to the Air Force. But those two services, the services that have to procure expensive long-term things, need to actually make the investment in things that are slightly more expensive. F-35 type planes and its replacement are expensive. More importantly, ships are expensive, and they take a consistent investment. And when you have a larger budget, you can do multi-year ship buys. Congress has allowed that. You can do multi-year plane buys. Congress has allowed that. And we're starting to allow multi-year munition buys. As a new secretary does that and prioritizes the right things for Taiwan, if they have enough money, then they can get it done. But you have to have the resources. Then you have to have good leadership. Then you have to have a good assessment and prioritization of what's needed. When those things all come together, you end up with John Layman and, in the 600 ship Navy or whatever.
So let me ask you, Admiral, does the aircraft carrier figure in the longer range budget as opposed to, say, the Columbia Boomer class, more Virginia attack submarines, submersibles that aren't manned, is it time to start thinking about the carriers that we have are all the carriers we're going to get?
I do. I still do, and I say this as a surface warfare officer who's hurt every time when we buy carriers. The budget of the ships that I commanded are usually hurt, but I recognize they're needed. They are the way we impose cost. We do need to be smarter about long range strike. My friend Captain Jerry Hendricks, retired, has written extensively on the need for better long range strike from those carriers. Probably unmanned strike in a lot of cases. We need a better mix of that. But a carrier is part of it. A Columbia class is part of the strategic thing, a strategic response. And of course, Virginia class are of value. But I would tell you something, Hugh, we are not going to get Virginia class at a fast rate anytime soon, even with all the investments Senator Wicker's pushed their way over the last 2 years.
Wow. Okay, I hope Russ Vought is listening. And I hope that Michael Waltz is listening, and they go to the speaker and they go to incoming Majority Leader Thune and say, we need a budget that's realistic, and we can do that in the budget resolution. Admiral Montgomery, always good to see you. Admiral, be well. Come back soon as this transition takes shape. I want to hear what you think about the budget number that comes out in the budget resolution. Thank you, Admiral.
Thank you, Hugh.
Bethany Mandel, co-author of Stolen Youth, joins me. Good morning, Bethany. How are you?
Good morning. I'm good. How are you?
Good. Are Thanksgiving preparations underway in the Mandel household?
Not remotely. I'm looking at you and also a beautiful view of Puerto Rico. I am hiding from Thanksgiving preparations.
Well, that is my approach to Thanksgiving. Either it happens or it doesn't. I've got nothing to do with it. Bethany, I want to get your assessment of the situation in Israel right now, because there are rumors of peace in the north and intimations that a deal has been struck. What is your understanding?
So that's what I'm hearing as well. Laser Berman at the Times of Israel just gave a really good rundown for their website that I recommend. But I mean, unfortunately, it seems that they're two separate deals, what's happening in the north and what's happening in Gaza. And thus far, all of those events have been linked. But unfortunately, it looks like a ceasefire arrangement will be met in the north, but with no progress on what's happening in Gaza, which is unfortunate for the 101 hostages who are still left there.
Bethany, I've also seen a lot of criticism of Netanyahu, and I just don't understand it. Because Hamas has made it abundantly clear, whatever is left of it, they're not giving up the hostages. Israel's going to have to get them out. Is that your understanding?
I mean, there is something Netanyahu could do. He could leave Gaza, and that is the point where Hamas has said that they will start talking about a ceasefire and releasing the hostages. But under that premise, you have to trust that Hamas would do so after Israel evacuated Gaza. But then also you're sacrificing Gaza back to Hamas, and you're back at square one. And that's not an arrangement that Benjamin Netanyahu nor the majority of the Israeli public are willing to make. But I mean, that is the choice on the table.
And I don't believe that's a good choice. I'm not an Israeli. I don't have to make that. There are some Americans in the tunnels that we have to worry about, but I have confidence in this cabinet. That brings me to a political question, Bethany. Do you, as an American Jew, have confidence in the Netanyahu government right now?
I mean, I'm very glad I don't have to vote in those elections, and I try to stay agnostic on them because he's faced with a lot of impossible scenarios. I'm glad I'm not him. I'm glad I don't have to vote on him, but I wouldn't have confidence in any government right now because there's just a lot of Sophie's choices happening.
Well, 14 months after 10/7, or 13 months, almost 14 months, are the Israelis in a position you expected them to be in after on 10/8? Did you expect them to be in this decisive a victory position in Gaza and in Lebanon and having basically, I think, scared Iran back into its hole?
I'm surprised by the degree of victory that Israel has achieved in Lebanon specifically. The hits against Hamas leadership in Iran were incredible. The bombing of the bunkers in Beirut were also incredible. The achievements are just remarkable and will be studied one day. And if we had a Hollywood elite that cared to do such things, there would be a movie about the beeper operation that was unbelievable. It's really incredible. But at the end of the day, to me, victory in Gaza means the return of 101 hostages. And until that point, I don't think I would feel comfortable saying that what we've achieved in Gaza is decisive until 101 hostages are returned, many of whom are dual citizens of many countries, including the United States.
But I do believe that history will record that the first hostage release was great, that Hamas just made it impossible other than by the means that Israel has adopted, which is to win and continue to win and to oblige Hamas to surrender and leave, because I just don't think they're negotiating, are they? Bethany, have you seen one report that indicates there's one responsible terrorist there?
No, there have not been any indications that there's been good faith negotiations for a year. Yesterday marked the first anniversary of the first day of the releases. And those were miraculous releases in which we saw, children being released, grandmothers being released. It was incredible. But now the only releases that we've seen over the course of the last year have been rescues. And it's so frustrating for the families who are still, know that their loved ones are languishing in those tunnels.
So, Bethany, in terms of the holidays ahead, is it a somber mood around Jewish American tables because of the anti-Semitism here in Montreal, around the world? Or is it festive because I think deterrence is restored in the Middle East? I'm not sure, but what's the mood?
I mean, today, unfortunately, it's very sad because a rabbi in the United Arab Emirates in Dubai was kidnapped and murdered by Uzbeki nationals who were hired guns of the Iranian regime. And so I think, especially me traveling right now, and I'm thinking to myself, is it safe for my voice to wear yarmulkes? If the Iranians are hiring, nationals to just take out Jews wherever they see them. This was just a Chabad rabbi who owned a kosher supermarket in Dubai. Like, this wasn't a controversial figure. It's open season on Jews around the world. That's the signal that the Iranians just sent. And so today it's very sad because, his funeral is today. His wife is now a widow. He was 28 years old, and he was murdered for the crime of being Jewish.
And that happened. No one was murdered in Montreal over the weekend, but it was a pogrom in Montreal.
Yes.
And I want people to understand it's happening everywhere. And there's only one answer to that, and that is to be strong. Israel and the United States and all of our allies in the West and Europe is not doing its job. Canada has failed terribly. They got to change the government up there. They've got to change governments throughout Europe. I want to thank everyone who sat in for me last week. Generalissimo on Monday and Friday. We had the wonderful Kurt Schlichter on Tuesday. We had Mark Davis on Wednesday. We had our old and very good friend, who I can't remember right now. Oh, yeah, Ed Morrissey on Thursday, and then Dwayne. I am, however, back, and Garrity, the indispensable, is with me, Jim Garrity of National Review. Jim, good morning. I want to begin not with the transition. I went through all the appointments that happened when I was off for a week, but with the Congress. Nothing happens until a budget resolution passes. Then reconciliation is allowed with the simple majority, no filibuster. So everything depends upon the budget resolution. The deadline for that is April 15th. I don't know why it can't be done on January 22nd. Do you?
It won't be done on January 2nd, Hugh. I'm sorry to disappoint you.
22nd. 22nd.
No. Look, my guess is you'll see it happen rapidly. Whether you hit, January 22nd is setting the bar pretty high. But everyone on, Congress is fairly on the same page. Certainly on, extending the tax cuts, energy, border security. There's broad consensus on these priorities, and there are probably a bunch of Democrats who don't want to take an unpopular vote in a couple of House districts. So I think you'll see fairly productive. And the only thing that has to be look, one of the hard lessons of Trump's first term is that if you lose election and you're replaced by a Democrat, everything you did by executive order can get undone with the stroke of a pen. So you want to do as much as possible through the legislative process to make it harder for any future Congress to undo. And so I'm hoping to see a lot done this way. My fear is that Trump, who loves executive power will, try to do a lot through executive orders, and you get a policy change in place for 4 years. But, they could that some Democratic president in the year 2029 can then try to reverse it with, executive orders of their own.
Now, on my week off, Jim, the national debt passed $36 trillion. So you see, I go away for a week and we go over $36 trillion. A budget resolution has to agree on the amount of red ink that the Congress will spend in the following forever long, however, it's a 10-year window usually. I would make the Trump tax cuts permanent. I would remove the tax on tips. They campaigned on that. I would double the $10,000 to $20,000 on salt. And I would increase military spending. I would condition spending on the states for school choice. Obviously, the wall's got to be built. Are there any other priorities in Jim Garrity's mind? Because nothing happens unless it's in the budget resolution, and the budget resolution passes both houses.
One of the things I'm kind of as you're rattling that off, Hugh. So DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, it's going to take some time to come up with its recommendations. And unfortunately, you've passed the budget for the first year, right? So if you come up with stuff that can be zeroed out, you can say, this is a bad program, and we're going to have the cabinet secretary zero that out, unless it's specifically written into the appropriation. But my sense is that you almost wish that, DOGE had started a year ago and would be in a position to make its recommendations early on. So that's a little bit of a thing. We'll see that as a fight leading into the, in the year 2026, which would have been nice to get that.
But we can do some things. I want to ask you about the symbolic stuff. I want to cut the Corporation for Public Broadcasting to zero. I want to disestablish the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Endowment for the Art, the National Historic Trust. I want all the low-hanging fruit in this budget resolution. I mean zero out. Do you think the Republicans have the spine to do that?
Nervousness. Look, about the Import-Export Bank on there?
No, I like the Export-Import Bank.
Really?
Because we have to compete. We have to compete with other subsidies. That's a national security issue.
Those poor corporations. How are they going to get by without the U.S. government helping them out in that way?
We can have a long conversation about that. Philip Klein and I have, but it's a national security issue. Put it aside.
All right, I'll grant you that. But you're right that at some point you should be pointing out that the sheer amount of Sesame Street merchandising should be able to take care of that for PBS.
Yes.
Do supporters, I've noticed that on PBS they'll play something that you really like. Often at it used to be Paul Simon in the Graceland concerts or something. You're like, wow, this is really, and then the pledge drive, and then they say, hey, if you donate this much, you get our lovely tote bag And it's kind of this like that. And then the moment they don't need money, they go back to the stuff that you never want to watch. And there's kind of this nagging. Wait a minute. If this is the stuff that everybody likes to watch for fundraising week, why aren't you playing this all the time? Also, I think, and actually, of all of them, I think National Public Radio is going to have top of the line, top of the front.
Well, I'm having lunch today with an NPR guy, and I know he's going to tell me we only get 1% of our budget from the federal government, and I'm going to respond,
Good. And
not
that's easy
anymore,
to get
you
rid of.
don't.
You'll be able to get by
Yeah,
on
good,
99%
easy to
of
get.
your
It's
current
exactly my response. And
Yep.
the Corporation for Public Broadcast funds PBS and the NPR. They're easy. NEA and NEA H
budget.
are
You'll
harder.
pick up the check at lunch. You might need it.
I will. But I mean, do you think they can do that? The question is, if it was an emergency, and it is an emergency, you can get that done on day one. And I don't know why Speaker Johnson doesn't name two people. Then you put in Michael Waltz and Russ Vought. Then you get two people from Thune's team, and the six of them hammer this out so you can pass it on January 22nd. Why not?
Look, because everybody wants to have their say. Everybody wants to weigh in. A whole bunch of people got elected to Congress, and like we have these two competing interests, right? We've got, on the one hand, you want efficiency. On your one hand, you want things to happen quickly. There's a reason the first 100 days matters for a presidency. It's not that they never get anything else done during the rest of the presidency. It's just that within those first couple of months, events will happen. Foreign policy crises, natural disasters, other things, scandals, things will happen that will take up the time and energy and resources of an administration. So that opening 100 days is your best window of opportunity, which is why, but let's point out, is there any other major Trump cabinet position that needs to be named? I mean, I guess we're down to ambassadorships.
No, we're all done. We're all done,
Undersecretary-
except the Department of Justice needs an Office of Legal Counsel. That's like the brain of the government, the OLC chief. But other than that, everything's done. Big ones.
I was going to say, we've been hearing all year that this is a much more disciplined, focused, and well-run Trump campaign than the 4 years ago and 8 years ago. I think you could say this transition is by far the smoothest. Well, okay, and even something happens like with the Gates nomination. They got Pam Bondi in within a few hours, which, by the way, does indicate that at least somebody, if not Trump himself, somebody around Trump was saying, there's a chance that Matt Gaetz might not get through this confirmation process. So I don't know whether she was the backup quarterback and was warming up on the sidelines the whole time. I don't buy the theory that this was 9-level chess or something like that. But this is just a comment. Like, this is really good because one of the problems, not just, by the way, for the Trump administration, for the Biden administration, you would go 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, well into the first year of the president just not even appointing anybody. And you just figured, one of the basic things you do is you'd go through all your top donors and you'd know who's getting which nice ambassadorial slot.
Yeah, but that's all. The most important thing, though, I'm dragging you back to the most important thing. The budget resolution is what Trump needs to get passed in order to get the economy going, in order to hold on to the House in 2026 so he won't be impeached again by Democrats for whatever sneezing, and hold on to the Senate where there are 20 Republicans up and 13 Democrats. It's all about the first budget resolution. Do you think they get that in the caucus?
Oh, yeah. Just, I don't think it happens quickly. I think it probably will take a month, 2 months, 3 months, somewhere in there.
Jim,
it all depends on how
why?
cooperative everybody's feeling.
They're going to lose the House unless the economy is booming. To get the economy booming, you've got to pass that budget resolution.
No, like Hugh, they should be bringing you in to speak to the House caucus. They should be bringing you in to speak to the Senate caucus. However, none of these guys feel like they were sent to Washington to be a rubber stamp, which means you have to delegate the negotiation of all the details to somebody else. And that's something that a bunch of these guys aren't, everybody's going to want to have their say.
All Donald Trump has to do is say, you're getting a primary opponent unless you vote for the budget resolution, Jim. And then they'll get it in one day. Because he can go out and recruit any one of these Republicans.
Printed, you'll see, I'd be surprised if you saw any Republicans vote against it. But it's
That's
what you do when you get there. Go ahead.
So it can be done, right?
Oh, yeah.
If people focus on it, it could be done.
Yeah. Not within 2 days. I think that would be, I think that's a very tall order. First couple of weeks, first couple of months, that's plausible.
You know, Jim, we have to continue the conversation next week because I just don't think it's a tall order. I think it's a question of, do you resolve to get it done, go and do it, and tell your caucus to shut up, sit down. We're going to win 2026, not lose it. Coming up later in the program, Peggy Noonan is going to join me to talk about her brand new book, America as I See It. And I think it's a fabulous book, a certain idea of America. I want to get it right. A certain idea of America, and Peggy's going to be along. Let me also tell you about tomorrow. I'm going to be talking with Kevin Roberts about his brand new book, Dawn's Early Light, Taking Back Washington to Save America. Dr. Roberts is the president of the Heritage Foundation. They are a sponsor of my show, but I don't read books unless I want to read books, and I want to read Kevin's, and I will be reading it tonight and this afternoon after lunch with my friend from NPR. I'm going to say, sorry, I think you ought to be zeroed out. But Dawn's Early Light, I don't know if it says that yet. I haven't read it yet. The Heritage Foundation is at the front edge of the point of the spear when it comes to genuine reform. And I will bet the Doge, Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, have Kevin Roberts in the room when they're going through the reorganization of the federal government to put into budget number 2. And the variety of ideas in Dawn's Early Light is vast. The detail is immense. And the persuasion should be high for everyone who cares about a sustainable American government going forward. $36 trillion in debt. We're probably going to hit $40 trillion before we begin to turn it around with growth and energy. But I will read and we will discuss tomorrow Dawn's Early Light with Kevin Roberts. In the meantime, you ought to head over to Amazon and order up Dawn's Early Light. It is the answer in many situations for what ails the federal government. And Kevin Roberts has been here working hard at that. It is the blueprint for draining the swamp, the blueprint for doing that. Now, I want to focus on something very specific, Big Pharma. Now, we have a wonderful sponsor, and the Conservatives for Healthcare Reform has been there for a long time. But right now, we are focused on the lame duck because Conservatives for Lower Healthcare Costs, pharmawindfall.com. I wanted to find their website, pharmawindfall.com. Right now, Big Pharma, and I do not like them because of what they did to us with Obamacare. I was always neutral on Big Pharma. My brother worked for Big Pharma until his retirement, and they've done a lot of good for America. They've come up with a lot of drugs. Every time they screw around with the law, they screw it up. Now they're coming after the pharmacy benefit managers, and they want to make your drugs more expensive because that means they make more money. And I understand the invisible hand. I understand Big Pharma wants to work the system for Big Pharma's sake. But conservatives should not favor Big Pharma over pharmacy benefit managers over consumers. The way to go is to go to pharmawindfall.com, sign up, and tell Congress, especially in this lame duck, not now, not ever, never. There's a $32 billion windfall on the table. Chuck Schumer did a deal on the judges, which made my eyebrows go up. So he said, okay, I'll give you, we won't try and push through 4 appeals court judges if you let us have 12 district court judges. And I thought to myself, that's an odd deal. District court, yeah, I mean, people like being on the district court if they're so inclined. If they make a mistake, they're reversed by the circuit. So they gave Donald Trump 4 circuit court appointees like in his first week. And I hope they get that done. And you need the new White House counsel and Pam Bondi to sit down with their OLC and everyone who's doing the vetting at PPO, Sergio Gore. And they got to come up with 4 great appeals judges right out of the bank. That will put him past Obama, by the way. Donald Trump in his first month in office will pass President Obama in his 8 years for appeals court judges. And that makes me smile. But why did Chuck Schumer clear the deck? Why did he do that? Because he's only got control of the gavel for another 2 months. And I'm afraid he's going to use the control of the gavel to reward Big Pharma. Do not let him do that. Go to pharmawindfall.com and join the fight to stop that. Big Pharma's grab of $32 billion should not be allowed to pass. Mike Johnson can stop it, but it ought not to get off the Senate floor. Pharmawindfall.com. Go there and check it out. Haviv Rettig-Gur from Israel. Haviv, it is Thanksgiving week. One of the things I am thankful for is that you have been a guest on my show and that Dan Senor introduced me to you. I think you've been invaluable to Americans interested in this horrible year in Israel. So thank you for that. Let me begin by asking you, It's been 14 months almost since that dreadful day of 10/7. Are the Jewish people worldwide and Israelis specifically better off than they were a year ago at this point?
Wow, what a fascinating question. More aware of the dangers that awaited them. They felt better off before, but they were not. These enemies were preparing, tremendous dangers for them. We know that what Hamas did on October 7th, Hezbollah was planning many orders of magnitude, or roughly an order of magnitude larger, and we know that Iran talks constantly about building a ring of fire and killing Israel slowly, and the Israelis were asleep. And so the Israeli half of the Jewish people, roughly half the Jews of the world are Israelis, is safer, but feels the danger. But becoming aware of a real danger doesn't mean you're less safe, it means you're more safe, even if it doesn't feel that way. Jews outside of Israel are in a bit of a more complicated situation. On the one hand, they're safer than they've ever been, largely because most of them live in America and in the English-speaking world. And that has been the safest place for Jews to live in all the millennia of Jewish history. But at the same time, they begin to suspect that they are seeing on the horizon a new kind of opposition to them, hatred of them, categorizing them as the great enemy of civilization, and seeing through Zionism, but also relating these ideological anti-Zionism of academia and of parts of the left to Jewish communities. Jewish communities everywhere are facing violence. We know from FBI reports that there is no religious community in America that faces more violence. There's no minority in America that faces more hate crime violence than the Jews. And so they are feeling, again, they're the safest Jews who've ever lived, but they are feeling less safe than they felt before. And I think there's something to that. It's a choice that
I think we had a pogrom in Montreal over the weekend. We had a pogrom, I think, in Belgium last month. Rabbi Kogan was murdered in the United Arab Emirates over the weekend. It does seem to me that while Israelis might be alert, the rest of the world is sleeping on this return of the ancient evil. Is that the way it looks from your perspective in Israel?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anti-Semitism is not when you think Jews are not great. Anti-Semitism isn't when you don't like them. Anti-Semitism is when you've developed an ideology, and this happened in many civilizations, in Christianity early on, in Islam. It's a majority opinion today of Muslims, certainly in the Arab Muslim world. It's the belief that Jews stand in the way of redemption. And academia in the West has managed to reproduce the idea that Marxists once held: Jews are the capitalist superstructure holding back the proletariat. And Hitler talked about Jews being the opposite, being the secret communist cabal that is the secret order of being holding down the folk. Now academia has managed to produce a way of thinking that tells us once again that Jews are the problem with the world. Everything is Palestine actually means everything is Zionism and Israel. And so somehow police violence in Seattle is the fault of the Jews, ultimately, in some secret order of being. And so yes, it's come back, and it's come back through the elites. Anti-Semitism, unlike ordinary hatreds, unlike just someone who has a Jewish neighbor they don't like and so doesn't like Jews, that kind of banal prejudice, anti-Semitism feels righteous. And we're seeing that. We're seeing a righteousness that allows people to take out their violence in random communities. Think about it like this, Hugh. If Azerbaijan and Armenia had just had a war in which Azerbaijan cleansed whole populations of Armenians from an entire territory, if people started marching down the streets of Montreal or Amsterdam or New York and taking their anger out on Azeri Muslims, that would be obvious to everybody that we're talking about deep prejudice that has nothing to do with the war on the other side of the world. But with Jews, it's not obvious.
Well, I am,
It's defended by
Haviv, I'm a Catholic, and I don't know exactly what he said, but it appears that Pope Francis accused Israel of genocide last week. And I deeply regret that, and I apologize as a Catholic to you for having a pope who said that, though I'm not certain he said it. What's your understanding of what he said, and how is that received in Israel when the leader of the Roman Catholic Church makes idiotic remarks like that?
I think that what he was trying to do was appeal to many different factions within the church. And what he said was that he believes there's room for an investigation to be opened, or something very diplomatic and very careful. but that also delivered the word genocide from the mouth of the Pope to the people who wanted to hear that word. Frankly, the Israelis shrugged and moved on. If you don't tell us how to solve the problem of Hamas, as if Hamas wants peace, as if Hamas wants two states, as if a withdrawal from the West Bank will do anything but bring more war to a much larger area, if you can't actually solve the problem of Hamas for us, screaming the worst words in the English language at us repeatedly when you don't use them on anything else on earth, isn't useful. And if the Pope joins that chorus, Israelis aren't going to listen to him. I frankly, it made the headlines for about 40 seconds and disappeared.
Yeah, but it's deeply chagrin. It's a source of chagrin for me because of the Vatican's very blemished record in World War II. And I've read the Pope's War. I'm aware of the counter arguments, but it's not something any Supreme Pontiff ought to be saying in any forum, anywhere, anytime. Let me talk to you about the practical implications of the approach of Trump 2.0. I don't know if there's going to be a deal in Lebanon. You tell me, but I sure do expect Trump to be better for Israel than Joe Biden has been. Do you?
As always, the caveat, Joe Biden did a lot for us. We don't deserve to just expect that. Thank you. Having said that, all Trump has to do to be better than Joe Biden is push back on Iran. Constantly fearing escalation. The obsessive fear of escalation is the enemy, Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, have literally built the grand strategy around the American fear of escalation. If you're not afraid of escalation, you won't actually have to escalate. Wars will actually end because the enemy will not want to be destroyed. But you have to actually be willing to escalate in order for the enemy not to see it in its own favor to escalate. This is very, very basic stuff. This is 2,500-year-old Chinese wisdom. This is Sun Tzu. None of this is new. And so it's very frustrating that the outgoing administration didn't understand that. Yes, I think Trump will be very good on that front in the Middle East. Frankly, even if he pulls back on aid for Israel, if he pushes against Iran seriously the way America can, then the net will be a massive benefit to Israel and a massive benefit to the Middle East. And frankly, de-escalation and stability, which is what the Democratic administration wanted but couldn't get because they were too afraid of escalation to actually convince the enemy to de-escalate.
I'm very optimistic because I think Senator Rubio, who will be Secretary of State, and Mike Waltz, who will be the National Security Advisor, are very clear-eyed about this. Now, what Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, retired, one of our best strategists in the United States, I don't know if you know the Admiral or not, said last hour is that Israel is now clear-eyed about Russia and China, and they weren't until the massacre and the war. They now know that Russia and China and North Korea are all in bed with Iran. It's one quartet of bad actors. Do you think he is overly optimistic in his assessment of Israeli worldview, or is he accurate that the Russia-China option's off the table?
If the world is dividing again between America and another superpower, every Israeli I know, from far left to far right, wants to be on the American side. The only thing that could make Israel leave that American camp when it comes to China, Russia, is if it's pushed out. So as long as it's not pushed out, let's say by an 8-year Democratic administration that decides to sanction it, and then it has to turn to China and try to be useful to China. But that is an extreme, and it would do it in great pain. I think Israel there is no chance of Israel leaving the American camp as long as it's allowed to remain within it, and the Admiral is absolutely correct. There was a flirting with China because there was a sense that you could be neutral in between, sell some military equipment to China. I think that is absolutely gone. I completely agree with the Admiral's assessment.
All right, so my last question, Haviv, is very complicated. I know what the end game is supposed to be in Lebanon, an agreement that may or may not yield a longer-term peace and restoration of more authority in the Lebanese government that is not Hezbollah. I don't know what the end game in Gaza is going to be, other than it's going to be, we're going to talk a year from now, and Israeli troops are still going to be in Gaza, and hopefully the hostages will have been released by then, but I'm not sure they will be. What's your estimate of a year from now, Haviv, in Gaza?
Israel has one strategy in Gaza, and it's the only available strategy. Hamas made sure there are no other strategies. And that is a long, awful degradation war in which it degrades Hamas slowly. as Hamas comes out, Israel retreats from areas, allows Hamas to come back out of the tunnels, destroys that element of Hamas. We've seen that strategy over the last year. Slowly, Hamas is ground down. This was fundamentally the American strategy against ISIS in northern Iraq over 5 years. There was this war. It was an awful war. There was urban fighting that basically demolished the city of Mosul and other cities. But it took 5 years, and ISIS was much less dug in than Hamas. So this is going to be, with any luck, 2 years, and with less luck, and this is not a region famous for being very lucky, even longer, that long degradation. But, before people despair, let me just say, there is no alternative in the Israeli view for a very simple reason. If Israel does what the pro-Palestinian camp wants, which is declare a ceasefire and pull out, Hamas retakes Gaza. And that means that we're back in this war in 3 years, or it means that you simply can't give the kind of money to Gaza that would rebuild Gaza, or it means that there's a constant regime of Israelis entering into Gaza in various pinpoint operations based on intelligence. So there's simply don't wish for Gaza an Israeli withdrawal and a ceasefire that allows Hamas to retake it. For however horrible this war was, the only chance for rebuilding is Hamas removed, even if it's a long degradation war.
Does the IDF ever sit down with people like you, Habib, who are very much respected and listened to in the United States? Do they ever give you an estimate of when it will take to destroy all the tunnels and move methodically through the Hamas infrastructure? We got about 30 seconds to the break. I want to talk to you about Netanyahu on the other side of the break. But do they ever give you any kind of a...
Yeah, at the very beginning of the war, right around November, the defense minister at the time, Yoav Gallant, talked about many, many months, and a couple of times he talked about a couple of years. And he was trying to set expectations. They don't even talk about time now. It's open-ended, and it depends on whether we have allies who can come in and de-radicalize and rebuild or not.
Habib, since we last spoke, it seems to me, and I don't know much about Israeli politics, but I do read the Times of Israel every day, that Prime Minister Netanyahu is in a much stronger position than he was a month or 6 weeks ago when we last spoke, with the exit of Defense Minister Gallant, the addition of Sa'ar's coalition. What do you think? Is this government going to last its entire mandate and not fall before then?
It looks that way. It might fall before then, but almost, I think every Israeli government in its history fell early, so that would not mean he's failed. But it looks like it's got another year or two left in it. Just people don't need to get too much into the weeds, but a faction, an anti-Netanyahu right-wing faction led by a guy named Gideon Sa'ar, has come into the coalition over the last just month and a half. One of the big developments, and he's now the foreign minister, and a rebellion within Likud led by Gallant on the specific question of the ultra-Orthodox draft, on which most Likud voters are actually on Gallant's side of the substantive debate, but don't want to see Netanyahu destabilized, has now been essentially ended by the firing of Gallant. So Netanyahu, both internal party, challenge to him, and the coalition, which was really holding on by the skin of its teeth, it didn't have a lot of the numbers to win, by any real majority and Knesset vote, now does. And so Netanyahu's political position is stabilized very, very dramatically, and roughly, and in the polls, he's roughly up to the point where he could launch a re-election campaign. He wasn't 6 months ago or 12 months ago, but he's recovered very, very slowly, but very consistently from the collapse of his numbers, obviously, after October 7th.
So my last question, and this is very much in the weeds. I read about your attorney general, and she strikes me as a force of disruption who loves too many headlines and doesn't really believe in democratic rule by elected majorities. When does she get fired, Habib?
The problem here with the question of our very powerful legal advisors and extremely powerful Supreme Court is complex. What the right says about them is true, but what the left says about them is also true. We have a political system that on the one hand has the most powerful Supreme Court in the history of the world. On the other hand,
yes,
we have no check between executive and legislative. There is essentially no other check in the system at all, and we can get into the weeds if you want, but because we elect because the entire country is a single constituency, there's no direct election of MPs, and party lists you vote for a party, not for a specific MP, and the list of that party is set by the party leader in most cases. De facto, the members of the government, the executive branch, appoint the parliamentary majority. And so we are probably have the fewest checks and balances of any democracy, and that has led to a massive strengthening of the judiciary. It's also kind of a Jewish thing. Jews love law. I'll give you an example. Israel has by far the highest per capita number of lawyers on earth and the most powerful judiciary on earth. Those are not accidental. It's deeply cultural. All of that.
But the Attorney General specifically, Aviv, she's the one that drives me crazy, not your Supreme Court. It's just she shows up all the time. How long does she stay?
Her power was a function of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court granted attorneys general the power to essentially veto legislation. And so firing her won't help, because the precedent was set 25 years ago. Let me just say, what we need is exactly what the right wants, a reform that massively weakens our court, but while weakening our court, builds other checks on executive power that don't exist.
That's Dr. Orange.
And that's
Thank you, Aviv. We'll do that next time, because you're going to have to explain that to me. I appreciate your time this morning. Happy Thanksgiving from America.
Happy Thanksgiving to Americans.
This book by Peggy Noonan, A Certain Idea of America, has been the source of domestic conflict, because I've been taking it back from the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt all week, and then she takes it back from me because she loves Peggy Noonan's writing so much. Peggy Noonan joins me now. Good morning, Peggy. Congratulations on A Certain Idea of America. But it is a source of domestic division inside the Hewitt household.
Well, rarely am I so happy to hear I'm being a source of domestic division. Hello, Hugh, and hi to Mrs. Hewitt, and thank you for having me on.
Well, she wants me, and I will get to it, she wants me to particularly talk about your essay on George H.W. Bush, her favorite president, and we will get there. But I want to begin with your essay on the friendship between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, because it is the most important essay for this moment. I don't know if you've lost any friends over the last 8 years. I have. Got ghosted by people because I support Donald Trump, and they just ghosted me, and that's fine. Maybe they'll come back. Everyone needs a Benjamin Rush. It's a beautiful essay. Will you tell people about it?
Yeah, Hugh, what you say is true on both sides. I've been ghosted also for being oppositional towards Donald Trump. So it's happened a lot. There's been a great winnowing out here. And there you are. The story of John Adams and Thomas Jefferson is one of reconciliation. They had been the greatest of friends early on in the 1770s when they were inventing America and its meaning and its way of operating and its reason for coming on the world. Greatest of friends. Greatest of friends when they were both U.S. envoys in Europe as America became a beginning nation. Had some political differences, but really broke over the French Revolution, which John Adams quickly apprehended would end in terror, and which Thomas Jefferson decided was just the full flowering of the spirit of 1776, and he wasn't too worried about the violence. They broke for many years, and yet they had loved each other, and they had been geniuses together. And they had a mutual friend, Benjamin Rush, another signer of the Constitution, who knew that both men were wounded by the end of their friendship. And subtly over the years, he dropped hints to both. To Jefferson, Adams was talking about you. He loves you so much. To Adams, oh my God, Jefferson misses you. Finally, there were some slight outreaches, and then the beginning of an onrush of letters between Jefferson and Adams that lasted more than 10 years, and in which they poured out their hearts, or at least Adams did. Adams was a man who wanted so much. He was like a laser beam going towards the truth. Jefferson was a little more roundabout, not so interested in laying bare his heart. He changed the subject when the French Revolution came up in Adams's letters. Anyway, by the end, They had achieved their old friendship again. It was a balm to John Adams' heart. Famously, both of them, each of them died on the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson at his home in Virginia. I was going to say Monticello. I wonder if I got that right.
It is Monticello. Yep.
Yeah, it is Monticello. Sorry, I was getting Madison's thing there confused. Anyway, Jefferson quietly in the night at Monticello, Adams at home, and I think Braintree in Massachusetts. And Adams is, according to lore, his last words were on the 50th anniversary of the signing, well, at least Jefferson still survives. But they both had
We are
held
coming
out
up
to die on that
to the
great day.
Isn't that marvelous? And it's 50 years after the Declaration. We're coming up on the 250th. And the celebration
Yes.
ought to actually begin this year in April in Lexington and Concord. But by the
Yeah.
250th, do you think any Russians will be able to work on any of these breakages, or are they going to continue until and unless Donald Trump is retired and off of the scene?
I would like to think the human heart would be quicker and more full of alacrity than the political schedule. Maybe in the next few years, the Trump folk will settle down feeling they have settled this, they won. And maybe the anti Trump folk will settle down and think politics is not worth the loss of a friend. Politics is politics, but friendship has to do with love and it supersedes. And who knows, maybe miraculous things will happen, but as I said in the column, may you have a Benjamin Rush. Everybody's trying to repair something.
That's a exact quote. We're all trying to repair something. May you have a Benjamin Rush. That's in a certain idea of America. It's going to be a bestseller. It's just so fabulous. Peggy, I'm going to do the big three from my wife. She wanted me to talk to you about Billy Graham. And so I read that one very carefully. Turns out we have a common friend in Archbishop Chaput. And Billy Graham was a man who wanted to save your soul, whoever you are, in whatever circumstances. And I love the quote the Archbishop gave you. He spoke the same kind of mere Christianity that C.S. Lewis did so well, but with an American accent. Did you ever meet Billy Graham? I got to meet him twice at both Nixon funerals, but how about you?
I never met him. I watched him from the time I was a child in New York in local programming on local TV. If Billy Graham had a crusade, it'd wind up on one of our 7 channels. And I remember walking by the TV set and seeing that tall, slim, high cheekboned fella speaking at a podium without notes, with only one text, and that was the Bible. And sometimes he'd turn to it and turn the pages. My family was Irish Catholic. Billy Graham seemed to me some sort of Southerner, sounded like a Southerner, and he seemed some sort of Protestant. But in the darndest way, as Archbishop Chaput pointed out, Billy Graham was in a time not of ecumenism, in, say, the early 60s and late 60s. He was an ecumenical figure. Catholics and Protestants and agnostics, they all kind of saw it. They could hear him in the same way. And his message was essential. Christ died for you to redeem you. Christ is God. Come, be a Christian. Here are the reasons why. It was simple and it was straight. And I found out later as I read about him, he exhausted himself doing his Billy Graham crusades throughout the world. It wasn't a cushy job. It sort of wasn't like now everybody's kind of richer. And religious folk too can be kind of richer and have richer structures. It was kind of Billy Graham out on his own, inventing his own thing and working himself into exhaustion so that sometimes he stood up to speak and collapsed. So what a figure, what an American, and what a man to have lasted on the public scene for about 60 years, and no one in the end could question his sincerity, his authenticity, his love of God, and he put it
Yeah.
all
My
out there.
my
He kept
favorite
nothing for
episode of The
himself.
Crown. I am sure you
Yeah,
watched The
yeah,
Crown. I'm guessing, but I'm sure you
yes,
watched The Crown.
yes,
That's my favorite episode when the Queen says, "Bring me this man," and he shows up.
yes. And for once, the producers and writers on that show, I shouldn't say for once, but even they treated Graham with the dignity due him.
Now I'm get to go to my favorite one in here, which is not, it's not really relevant to Americans, but I thought you did Queen Elizabeth the justice that she deserved by counting among her qualities the simple graciousness with which she presided over the country. And it's a good argument for staying the course because there were some rough patches in there, Peggy Noonan.
Rough patches in her life, do you mean?
Oh, yes. Oh,
Elizabeth's
yes.
life? Oh my
Yes.
gosh, from the time she became queen, shockingly, a girl in her 20s, fairly newly married, married less than 6 years, I think. She had some young children, but she and her husband, Philip, a naval officer, were really just starting out in life when suddenly her father died. Uh, she got the word. She was in Africa with her husband, and she was elevated to the throne before she or anyone else quite expected or intended. And she was equal to the moment. And boy, did she break the code on how to be a monarch, how
Tough
to be
act to
that thing.
follow. I
Oh
do
my
not envy
gosh,
Charles
yes.
or William. I do not envy
Yeah,
them.
I
Let me go to
agree.
the next one because I'm going to do one for Betsy now. History gives George H.W. Bush his due. He did not want to embarrass or provoke, and you make a good argument, Peggy. He ought to have received the Nobel Prize, he and maybe James Baker, for jointly managing the dissolution of our most dangerous enemy that our common boss, Ronald Reagan, really put to the edge of collapse. But it had to be a managed collapse. Now that we look at it, it was very dangerous.
Yes, it was dangerous, and George H.W. Bush had, he was a natural gentleman. He was a natural patrician. He was a natural diplomat. He could imagine how the other guy feels. Bush understood that Moscow at the end of the Cold War was full of people who, whether it was a terrible system or as they thought a good enough system, but they were people who'd seen their entire system to which they'd given their lives collapse. They were lost, they were humiliated. H.W. Bush, knew in his gut that a humiliated foe is a dangerous foe. So he was not there to humiliate them, to dance on them, to beat his breast and crow about the superiority of our system versus theirs, and theirs naturally fell because it was wicked and inadequate. He said very little. He just saw to the peaceful end of a great nuclear power, the Soviet Union. He encouraged the rise of democracy. Um, he encouraged a feeling of calm, and he helped in a great diplomatic feat. He and Helmut Kohl and a few others helped see to the reunification of Germany, East and West, which had been torn abruptly after 1945. And, you know, it's funny, but Republicans then had such a reputation for competence in the international sphere that the world looked and thought, well, of course they did it right. America had a reputation for competence. So the world looked and said, well, the Americans are doing it correctly. What do you want? Only in retrospect could people see what a feat in the political history of man what George H.W. Bush did. Not winning the victory, but in a way, the harder task of handling the repercussions and outcomes of the victory. So it was a feat. The guy should have won a Nobel Prize. What the heck?
Let me ask you my big question that comes out of HW, President Reagan, Richard Nixon, everyone in the greatest generation back to Eisenhower who went to war from family, frontier, farm, and factory and came back. And America was blessed by a generation that had seen such awful things, they didn't really think about themselves that much. Do you think that the long war, the 20 years of war, have produced leaders of that caliber who are now going to be taking up positions of power, not necessarily at the top yet, because Donald Trump, of course, is not of that generation, but people like Senator Cotton, Michael Waltz was the new national security advisor. The people who went and fought that war, are they of the same caliber as the people who went and fought World War II?
Well, I can't make that comparison. I can tell you that those who fought World War II did come from, I think, a healthier education system, a healthier culture, a calmer country in its way. Those who fought the long wars of the early 20th century, the first quarter of the 21st century, I beg your pardon, had to maybe struggle against the tide a little bit to be well educated, stable, and sensitive. I'm not sure what I'm saying here is correct, but it seems to me they're impressive men, and they didn't as much have the culture to support them. So we'll see how they do. But I'll tell you, this is something worth thought, I think. World War I and World War II taught America what it is to win and be powerful. The long wars of the early 20th, 21st century taught its soldiers about some limits of power and about some limits on what you can do and not do, and tempered them, I suspect, with regard to many things. They are not a triumphant generation so far, but a tempered generation, I would think. And we'll see how that works out.
My last question, Peggy Noonan, I don't want to abuse your time. I want to know, you and Joseph Epstein are the two people, if I see your byline, I read everything. I think you wrote the most important essay of the last 20 years when you wrote The Rise of the Unprotected. And it's not in this collection, but there are many things in here like the
It is in
Uvalde.
the collection. Darling,
Did you change the title?
I don't think so, but it is in the collection, believe me. Because
Okay, because I think
I
I
feel
don't have to.
tenderly towards it.
Well, I cite it to everyone as the most obviously the explanation for everything that happened. And you wrote it, I think, in February of 2016. I think you wrote it long before it mattered. And I've used it to explain everything to everyone who will listen. It's the unprotected. It's not the countryside versus the city. The unprotected are in the city and the countryside. They're in Washington, D.C., as well as in Warren, Ohio, and wherever Peggy Noonan grew up. It's just, it explains everything. So I'll go find it. I think you changed the title because I went looking for it and
Maybe.
could not.
But you know, that column was for me the culmination of 20 years of thought. And it was also, I couldn't get into it and really can't now, but the protected and the unprotected, the column about the protected who make the laws and the unprotected who have to live in them, the protected who are upper middle and taken care of, the unprotected who are scrambling to get a foothold in America for whatever reason. That was in part, that was about long dialogues I'd been having for the previous decade with my sister, who was in the unprotected class as we grew up and was in the unprotected class. And my life had changed. I'd become a well-known writer. I had worked for presidents. I was protected. And just over the years, I could see the difference between my life and her life and our assumptions and observations and what frightened us had grown very different. And it was a lesson to me, and it was important to me, and it changed my life by changing my thinking.
Well, it has never not been with me since I read it. But now I've found another paragraph in the new book, A Certain Idea of America, which I'm going to use to explain Joe Biden to everyone. It's on page 223. Let me tell you something, Mr. Biden says to an old friend with a clenched jaw. There's a river of power that flows through this country. Some people, most people, don't even know the river is there, but it's there. Some people know about the river, but they can't get in. They only stand at the edge. And some people, a few, get to swim in the river all the time. They get to swim their whole lives in the river of power. And that river flows from the Ivy League. Second paragraph. A lot of hungers, resentment, and future actions were embedded in that speech by Joe Biden, Syracuse Law, class of 68. They aren't the words of an unsophisticated man, but of a man who wanted things, houses, power, the glittering prizes, and who can't always be talked out of them. Boy, Peggy, bullseye on 46. Do you think,
Yeah.
have your opinion changed at all in the last year? That was written before the last year.
No, it was written a few years ago. No, it's what I think. The long Biden quote is taken from Richard Ben Kramer's reporting in the book What It Takes. And the observations are my own. My gosh, I think the central story really with what pushed Joe Biden was that he wanted to be a Kennedy and didn't understand why he wasn't. He was tall and handsome and had good hair and a wonderful smile, but he hadn't been born in the river of power. And he resented that, and he fought scrappily. He fought with every tool he had. He used everything he had to rise and enjoy power and be the thing he thought he deserved to be, which was a famous, powerful guy who was admired.
Do you remember the exchange with Sam Alito when he made fun of Princeton, and then the next day he came in wearing a Princeton hat to prove that he wasn't anti-Ivy League? That came back to me when I read this essay on Joe Biden. It is really about envy, and it's a terrible burden. He might be right, by the way. That might be the source of the protected class, but I don't think that it is, especially in this age of technology. But for him, it was, right? For the people who grew up in the 60s.
Yeah, I think so.
Peggy Noonan, you've been wonderful. A Certain Idea of America has to go back to my wife now because I took it away from her last night to do my prep. And I appreciate the book so much, and I appreciate your taking time to spend with me. Have a great Thanksgiving week, Peggy Noonan.
You too, to all Hewitts, and thank you very much for giving me your time, Hugh. I admire you very much.
Oh, that's mutual. Thank you, Peggy Noonan.